I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life 20 plus years ago, and I just made sure it stayed ruined. So I went up and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention, and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it. It was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal not allowed in the state which was in a tank, right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early around midnight so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman but made sure to leave the room and parade, passed them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair, while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said have fun with my leftovers and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud, hookup and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day, I had my photos developed. The good old days, and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have it all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program or by his roommates, but I was. George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that a TA was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him, and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later, George called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened and told the officials, as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake, and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state under nearly any circumstances, animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate, in the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet. It was a good day. The only animals they left was some guppies in a fish tank.